On the day of the college entrance exam, the sickly class beauty, Bao, brought her 3 childhood friends and blocked the entire class at the entrance to the exam venue. I don't want to go in with red eyes. She spread her arms wide, crying so pitifully that tears fell like pear blossoms in the rain. Once this exam is over, we'll go our separate ways. I can't bear to part with everyone. As soon as she finished speaking, my 3 childhood friends stepped forward. One stood at the entrance, one blocked the classmates who wanted to go in, and another directly locked the school gate before saying coldly, "Anyone who goes in is going up against the Zhang family." No one dared to force their way in. I stood in the crowd, watching the seconds tick by, my palms cold. In my past life, I struggled desperately to break free from them, and called the police. I helped the whole class get into the exam room just before the deadline. But in the chaos, she broke down emotionally, crying as she ran away, and was killed in a car accident on the spot. Later, everyone blamed me for this on the day of the graduation trip. They teamed up to smear honey all over me and hang me off the edge of a cliff, even as I was being gnawed to death by ants. Their insults still lingered in my ears. She just wanted to keep us a little longer. Did you really have to make such a scene if you hadn't called the police? How could she have ended up in trouble? You're so heartless. You don't deserve to be alive at all. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to this very moment, with the school gate blocked. In my ears was still her tearful voice. "Stay with me a little longer." Okay. This time I did not step forward. I simply retreated silently to the edge of the crowd. Since you all think this exam isn't important, then let's miss it together. 1. Don't everyone want to spend a little more time with the baby? Outside the entrance to the exam center on the eve of the first Chinese language exam for the college entrance exam, Zhang Jinga with my 3 childhood friends blocked the entrance to the exam hall and cried so hard she could barely catch her breath. She was dressed in a spotless white school uniform, her eyes red, cowering like a frightened rabbit. Every time I think about walking into the exam hall, and then everyone going their separate ways, that I'll never get to see you all again, I feel so awful inside. I can't bear to part with everyone. These soft, tearful confessions, dripping with emotion, instantly blew up the already tense atmosphere at the school gate. The 3 childhood friends who had been gathered around her immediately took over the situation. "Stop pressuring her. Can't you see Jinga is crying?" Guangzhou shoved aside the security guard who had come over trying to persuade them, standing 185 centimeters tall, and also the captain of the school basketball team. That domineering push sent the 50-something security guard stumbling. Zhang chased it aside and slowly pushed up the gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. He turned to look at the classmates behind him who all looked anxious and spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. "Going in a little later won't make any difference at all. Today is the last time our class will be together, and no one's missing these few minutes. Everyone stay and keep Jinga company. Don't be so heartless." As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Xing had already stepped forward with a cold expression. He took a black U-shaped lock out of his backpack, and right in front of everyone with a click, directly locked shut the iron grill gate on the side of the school, which had originally been used as an emergency exit. He turned around and stood in front of the only main entrance. "Today, the guards won't dare make a move, and the teachers are already blocked inside. Whoever dares to force their way in now is refusing to give the 3 of us face. You should all know what kind of family backgrounds we come from." Time ticked by, second by second. I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the classmates around me, who at first were anxious, gradually become hesitant under Zhang Jinjia's tears. Only a few girls were left, occasionally lowering their heads to check the time, so anxious that they kept stamping their feet. Yet, because of Guyanzhou and the others' background, they didn't dare make a sound. Looking at this familiar scene, I knew I had been reborn on this day. In my previous life, I had also been standing here. The moment I saw Lu Xing take out the lock, I completely lost it. It was the college entrance exam. I rushed forward with all my strength, yanked Sheng Jing Yao away from the gate, and ignoring their attempts to stop me, immediately pulled out my phone and called the police. The police arrived with sirens blaring, forcibly cut through the padlock, and made the school reopen the gates. The entire class sprinted into the exam room on the very last beat before time ran out, and made it to the exam. But Zhang Jinga completely lost control of her emotions, ran onto the road, and died on the spot in a car accident. On the night of the graduation trip, the classmates who had once thanked me profusely when entering the exam hall instead joined Lu Xing, and the others to pin me down at the edge of a pitch-black cliff. Guanzhou broke the bones in my hand. Jiang Qi watched me struggle coldly, and Lu Xing covered my body in honey. She just can't bear to let us go. You had to call the police and blow the whole thing up. If it weren't for you, how would Jinga have had a breakdown? You killed her, and I'm going to make you pay. The agony of being nodded at by ants was still vivid in my mind. Song, what are you standing there for? Hurry up and help persuade Jingya. The girl beside me shoved me. I suddenly came back to my senses and met Zhang Jinjia's innocent eyes. I looked down and glanced at the second hand, ticking on my wristwatch. 8:35. I remained silent, and when no one was paying attention, Sully took a step back. This time I'm not getting involved. You all can miss the college entrance exam together. I turned around trying to around this filthy crowd and quietly head toward the bus stop across the street. There is also a back gate for faculty and staff at No One Middle School. If I run over there now, maybe I can still make it. But just as I took 2 steps forward, a sharp pain suddenly shot through my wrist. What do you think you're doing? I didn't know when Gu Yanzhou had strode over, grabbing my wrist so hard that the immense force made my bones ache. He looked at me wearily. You're sneaking around like that. Are you trying to go snitch to some teacher? Before I could say anything, Jiang Qi also walked over. Saying, is there anything in your head besides grinding practice problems and rules? Just because your grades are good, does that mean you can ignore people's feelings? Jinga is so emotionally overwhelmed right now, and you can't even spare a few minutes to stay and keep her company. His words were like a fuse, instantly igniting the classmates around him whose emotions had long since been swayed off course. Exactly. Why are you the only one rushing for the exam? You never even scored full marks in the mock exams. Did you? How much difference can a little time make with a top class? And none of us are scared. Only you, the worst one, are in such a hurry. So selfish. Everyone's here comforting Jinga, and she's trying to sneak in alone to steal the spotlight. Lu Xing folded his arms and added coldly, I already said it. Anyone who dares to force their way in today is making an enemy of us. Song, wanna try? Looking at those 3 faces, so familiar yet so utterly indifferent, I let out a self-mocking curl of my lips. Back then, Guanzhou would brave a downpour and cross half the city to buy my favorite dessert. Jiang Che would stay up for several nights straight just to help me organize a handwritten collection of wrong answers. And Lu Xing would go head-to-head with senior year punks just so I wouldn't be bullied. But ever since Zhang Jinga transferred here in our second year of high school, all their tenderness and favoritism had shifted away without the slightest reluctance. I, a childhood friend who had grown up with them, instantly became, in their eyes, boring test-taking nerd who ruined Shang Jinjia's romantic fantasies every time. All eyes fell on me. The 2 girls in the front row even walked straight over, grabbed my arms from the left and right, and forcefully dragged me back into the center of the crowd. Don't go. Zine, we're all part of a group. How can you get special treatment? They said with laughter, though their hands never loosened their grip. I was yanked back into the crowd by sheer force, surrounded by mocking faces on all sides, hiding behind Gu Yanzhou. Zhang Jingya sniffled as she looked at me with a helpless expression. Baby just wants everyone to have a perfect memory before the college entrance examination. Let's sing a song together. Song of farewell. Beyond the long pavilion, beside the ancient road, the fragrant grass stretches to the horizon. Listening to the singing in my ears, I felt incredibly angry and irritated, but the painful memories of my past life calmed me down. I took a deep breath and put on an act of being helpless and unable to resist after being isolated. I'm not going. I lowered my head and walked over to Guyanja's side. I was wrong. I won't file the report. Good that you know your place. Guyanzhou let out a cold snort and turned back to continue coaxing Zhang Jingya in a soft, gentle voice while they weren't paying attention. I retreated to the green belt at the outer edge of the crowd and looked at the watch on my wrist. 8:50, only 10 minutes remained. The noise outside was too loud, and it finally alerted the school leaders. An exam proctor wearing a red armband rushed over. Drenched in sweat. Open the door. What are you doing? Unlock it right now. The security guard was so anxious he kept slapping his thighs. Leader, these students won't let anyone through. They've even put a big padlock on the side entrance. Which exam room are you from? Have you all gone crazy? The exam supervisor, standing behind the iron gate, pointed at Gu Yanzhou and Lu Xing at the front, and cursed angrily. There are only 10 minutes left until the exam starts. After the exam begins, entry is strictly forbidden 15 minutes later. If you're 1 minute late, your paper is void, and you get a 0. Are you trying to ruin the whole class? The proctoring leader's words reached everyone's ears. Finally, several students in the crowd, who still had some reason left, turned pale and subconsciously tried to squeeze forward. But at this moment, Zhang Jingyao was crying even more miserably. She suddenly broke free from Gu Yanzhou and plopped down directly on the ground, bursting into tears. Baby treats all of you as the most important people in his life. There are still 25 minutes left. Are you all going to leave? If you think baby isn't important, and you don't even cherish the time you have left together, then go ahead and leave. Don't mind me. These words instantly stopped the footsteps of those who had been about to move forward. Zhang Qi stepped forward at the right moment. He gave the unfamiliar school leader in front of him a once-over, then shook his head disdainfully. Teacher, I advise you not to waste your effort. Let me introduce myself. My surname is Zhang, and the director of the City Education Bureau, Director Zhang, is my uncle. The person beside me is Gu Yanzhou, the young heir of Gu's real estate. And as for Lu Xing, ask who invested in your school, and you'll know his identity. Hearing these 3 titles, the supervising leader clearly froze for a moment, and his expression changed slightly. Zhang Qi was quite satisfied with his reaction, and continued speaking matter-of-factly. Rules are dead. People are alive. Don't you understand the principle that the law cannot punish everyone? Besides, there are over 100 of us top students here. If all of us refuse to take the exam, no, one high school's college admission rate for this year will be completely ruined when the exam starts. Just call the people upstairs and say the gate had a little problem and will open 10 minutes late. They can't possibly really keep us out. Zhang Ch's confident expression instantly gave the classmates around him a huge sense of reassurance. Yeah, with young Master Zhang and young Master Gu here, the exam venue will definitely make an exception. As long as everyone acts together, they'll definitely have to give in. The proctoring supervisor was so angry he was shaking all over, but he still gritted his teeth and with trembling hands took out his walkie-talkie, trying to force an escalation to higher-ups, only to have Lu Xing grab his arm through the iron bars. Old bastard R, you getting cocky because we're being nice to you. Lu Xing chewed on his gum and suddenly leaned in. My brother Zhang is speaking to you politely because he's giving you face. Jinjia's emotions still aren't stable. If you dare cause trouble here again, believe it or not, I can make one phone call and have you pack your bags and get the hell out of No One High School tomorrow. I stood by the flower bed, watching all of this coldly from the sidelines. It's 9 o'clock. The exam bell rang. I could see it very clearly. The proctoring supervisor sighed. These students, he could no longer save them. He stopped pounding on the door, and instead let go in despair. Shaking his head, these young masters and misses from the greenhouse have no idea that the cutoff time for the college entrance exam is rigidly locked by the national system. There is absolutely no such thing as safety and numbers or a 10-minute exception in this exam hall where even a single minute can change one's fate. This time, no one will come to save them. Suddenly, a synthetic female voice came over the campus PA. Attention all examinees. The exam has begun. 15 minutes from now, no examinee will be allowed to enter. The first wavering candidates finally appeared. Why don't we go in first? The announcement is already urging us. And what if they really won't let us in? A girl's voice trembled as she cautiously edged closer to Gu Yanzhou. The group had already begun to stir with obvious unrest. Several people were clutching their admission, tickets tightly in their hands, staring in terror at the tightly shut iron gate. Zhang Jinga suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes darted around once. Then she abruptly broke into tears and laughter, loudly putting forward an even crazier suggestion. Since everyone has stayed, let's to the end. Let's stay together until the very last moment. And at exactly 9:15, everyone hold hands and rush into the exam hall together. This will definitely be the wildest and most romantic memory of our youth. Romantic. The girl who had just suggested going in was already on the verge of tears. Guyanjo whipped around and roared furiously. Let's see who dares leave today. The thunderous roar startled everyone nearby. Guyanjo swept his gaze over the few classmates who were showing signs of backing down and warned them through gritted teeth. Wasn't Jinga clear enough just now? Going hand in hand together. Today we're going to let the whole school see that our class not only has great grades, but is also rock solid in our bonds. If anyone dares to be a deserter now and ruin Jingya's mood, I'll be the first to deal with him after the exam. Lu Xing and Jiang Ch also tacitly stepped forward a big stride, blocking the doorway under the twin pressures of their power and violence, and with Jiang constantly brainwashing them with, when many people are involved, no one can be held responsible. The group fully took sides. The few classmates who had originally wanted to rush into the exam hall ultimately stayed behind. Exactly. With our grades, we can get into Tsinghua or Peking University blindfolded. Would a few minutes really make the difference between life and death? We sink or swim together. If you run off now, won't you be ashamed of yourself? Watching this crowd, completely consumed by madness and paranoia, I silently stepped back 2 more paces, pulling myself entirely out of the group. I lowered my head and looked at my watch. It was 9:10. While everyone was singing through tears, Jiang Jinga suddenly came over to my side and whispered a reminder. There's still a way out through the back gate of the school. It's still not too late. Before I could react, she had already joined the chorus with the others. I froze for a second, not understanding why she was suddenly telling me all this. But since I could get into the exam hall, I definitely wouldn't give up. In my previous life, I missed the top spot in the city by 1 point. In this life, I'd definitely make up that 1 point too. And as if helping me seize the opportunity, Jiang Jinga suddenly asked everyone to surround her, shifting everyone's attention away. Was she helping me? I stopped daydreaming, and while they weren't paying attention, ran toward the back door. 9:13, I managed to get into the school. As long as I made it to the door of my exam room and got through security, I could take the exam without any problems. Meanwhile, at the school gate, everyone was caught up in their emotions. All right, time's about up. This should count as the craziest youth experience ever. Right. Jiang Qi glanced at the clock and waved his hand gracefully. Lu Xing, open the door. Everyone hold hands and charge into the exam room in the most dashing way possible. Got it. Lu Xing walked up to the side door he had locked from the inside, took out the key, and shoved it into the keyhole. The whole class immediately and spontaneously joined hands there, faces beaming with smiles. However, 10 seconds passed. Click! Click! Lu Xing twisted the key hard, the veins on his forehead gradually bulging, and his movements on the key became increasingly frantic. What's going on? Brother Xing? Hurry up! Entry will be prohibited in just 2 minutes. The boy from earlier now sounded like he was on the verge of tears. Why are you rushing me? This lock is jammed. Lu Xing exclaimed anxiously, kicking the iron gate hard. The railing rattled with a buzzing sound, but the sturdy anti-theft lock remained tightly engaged, completely unmoving. Move aside. I'll do it. Guanga was panicking, too. He shoved Shang Jingyo aside and rushed up, frantically, smashing at the lock and pulling at the gate with Lu Xing. But no matter how hard they tried, the iron gate remained tightly shut. The security guard also rose above past grievances. He didn't want to delay the children's future, seeing that they wanted to get in for the college entrance exam. He immediately rushed over to help. Just then, the electronic announcement sounded on time from the loudspeakers above the exam hall. It's now 9:15. All examination staff, please note, admission time has officially ended. Stop verifying entry. Along with the cold announcement, the proctor walked out and was clearly startled to see that there were still so many people outside the school. but he still followed the rules and set up barricades inside the school. No, let us in. I'm Guyanjo. Let me in. Guyanjo had completely gone mad, rushing to the main gate and violently shaking the iron bars. Please open the door. I can't miss the college entrance exam. My mom will beat me to death. Let me in. Several girls completely broke down and knelt on the concrete ground, wailing loudly. Some even tried to climb over the school fence like madmen, only to be shouted at and stopped at this moment. Police cars also arrived one after another. They helped cut the lock open, but it was to no avail. The rules of the college entrance examination explicitly forbade it, and even with their powerful family backgrounds, there was nothing they could do. The so-called favored children of heaven, who had just been singing praises of youth, were now wailing outside the examination center. At this moment, Lu Xing looked at the crying classmates and realized something. Where's Song? As I sat in my seat in the exam room, the sirens outside and the faint cry seemed completely shut out by an invisible barrier. I took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing my wildly pounding heart, and focused all my attention on the test paper. Although I entered the exam room nearly 10 minutes later than the others, the memories of my past life gave me my greatest confidence at this moment. I had reviewed these questions countless times in the deep nights of my past life. Now that I was doing it all over again, every question felt incredibly familiar, and my hand seemed guided by divine inspiration as I wrote inside the exam room. It was so quiet that the only sound was the faint rustle of pen tips brushing against paper. In the gaps between answering questions, I couldn't help but think back to the words Shang Jinga had said when she came close to me at the end. Why did she help me? The school's back gate should have been sealed, too. So why did she tell me there was another back gate and help me divert everyone's attention originally? In this life, I had even prepared to repeat the year. At worst, I was ready to break the net in a fight to the death and take their act of locking the school gates to the public. Security Bureau. Yet, I actually ended up sitting here successfully taking the college entrance exam. No matter what, I'll finish the exam first. I pulled my thoughts back together, and in one go finished writing the last character of the essay. Examination over. Please stop answering as the bell to hand. And the papers rang. I let out a long breath, packed up my stationery, and followed the crowd out of the teaching building just as I reached the main gate of No One High School. I was stunned by the scene before me. The area outside the gate was already packed solid. Not only were there anxious parents and police maintaining order, but also more than a dozen local media outlets that had rushed over after hearing the news. Long lenses and short lenses were set up outside the cordon, and flashes lit up the whole scene. Student Gu, may I ask what the reason was for your entire class missing the first exam? There are rumors that you all did it to protest the exam room system. Is that true? The reporters shoved their microphones forward as hard as they could. The police had set up a cordon, but they simply couldn't hold back this group of reporters, desperate to grab the headline. Inside the cordon, Guyanjo, Yang Qi, and Lu Xing looked like trapped beasts, their faces livid with anger. Several students nearby were even clutching their heads and crying uncontrollably, already on the verge of a mental breakdown. No one knew who had sharp eyes, but suddenly someone pointed at the door and shouted, "Son, why did you come out from inside? I knew you weren't around. Where did you go?" "So you went in to take the exam." That scream instantly drew everyone's attention to me. Gu Yanho suddenly lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes fixed fiercely on me. He strode to the iron gate and roared at me, "Song, you ___ dared to sneak in. You actually betrayed us." The entire class seemed like a powder keg that had been ignited. They all rushed toward me, pouring the despair, enraged of having missed the college entrance exam onto me. Their expressions looked as if they wanted to tear me apart and swallow me whole. "Song, you ___ we agreed to stand or fall together. And you actually ran to the back entrance alone. You're so selfish. We came here to keep Jinga company, yet you used us just to go take your exam. How could you be so shameless? Traitor! A test solver is just a test solver. For a few points, you've even let your conscience be eaten by dogs." Hearing these vicious curses, I actually laughed in fury. Are you out of your minds? Your feet are on your own bodies. It's not like I held a knife to your throats and forced you not to go into the exam room. You were the ones who said you wanted to stay behind and create romance. So what now? Now that the romance is over, and you've realized you won't be going to school, you're starting to look for a scapegoat. My one sentence instantly tore off the last fig leaf they had left. One girl broke down in tears, turning to look at Jiang Jingya. Jingda, you were the one who said we should hold hands and go in together. What do we do now? My parents will kill me. Everyone's eyes instantly turned to Jiang Jingya. Jiang Jingya's face turned deathly pale, tears falling in large drops. She reverted to that weak, helpless look again, shrinking slightly into Guyanzhou's arms. Baby doesn't know. Baby just wanted everyone to have a memento. Baby never thought the door wouldn't open. Yeah, how could the door not open? Jiang Ch suddenly turned around and glared at Lu Xing through clenched teeth. Lu Xing, you were the one who brought that lock. You took it upon yourself to lock the door. Lu Xing was just as furious now, veins bulging in his neck as he grabbed Chong by the collar. You're blaming me now. Why didn't you say anything when I locked the door in the first place? Who was it that stood there saying their safety? And numbers? How was I supposed to know that? Damn. Lock would jam and be impossible to turn. Stop arguing. All of you. Stop arguing. Guyanzhou kicked the iron door irritably. More than 100 top students in front of the cameras of dozens of media outlets were blaming each other, cursing, and shoving one another like a pack of mad stray dogs, completely thrown into chaos. A little over 10 minutes later, the first parents to arrive completely broke down. Slap! As soon as a girl stepped forward, her father slapped her hard across the face. The man was trembling all over with rage, pointing at her nose, and unleashing a stream of abuse. I spent hundreds of thousands sending you to cram school, and today you tell me you were singing at the school gate and missed the exam. Godi! Cries, slaps, and wails instantly echoed outside the school gate. The parents from ordinary families who had worked so hard to raise top students watched their children trample all over 12 years of bitter, painstaking study, and each of them was practically about to cough up blood. The luxury cars of the Gujiang and Lu families also pulled up one after another by the roadside. As soon as Guyanzhou's father, Chairman Gu, got out of the car, his face was so dark it looked like water could drip from it. Guyanzhou had originally wanted to step forward and explain, but Chairman Gu immediately raised his hand and slapped Guyanzhou on the back, knocking him off balance and onto his knees. Dad, listen to me explain. It was an accident. Accident? My ass. Mr. Gu flew into a rage, pointing at him and cursing in front of everyone. You dragged your whole class here to protest the college entrance exam for the sake of some woman. You disgraced the Gu family completely. I'm telling you, this afternoon, I'll have the lawyers handle the paperwork. From today on, the Gu family inheritance rights will be handed over to your younger brother. And in this lifetime, you can forget about touching a single penny of the company. Guangzhou felt as if struck by lightning, and his whole body went limp to the ground. For someone as arrogant and untouchable as the young master, being stripped of his inheritance rights was even worse than killing him. The parents of Jiang Ch and Lu Xing were equally frustrated by how disappointing they were. Jiang Kai's eldest uncle was even summoned by the Commission for Discipline Inspection for questioning overnight. The Jiang family was now too overwhelmed to look after itself, and they didn't even spare Jiang Ch a glance, just as everything was in complete chaos. Gu Yanhao suddenly got up from the ground, walked up to me with red eyes, and grabbed my hand. Sign, you're not allowed to go take the math exam this afternoon. His tones still carried that overbearing sense of entitlement. We swore as kids that we'd go to the same university. Our grades are already ruined now, and you have to stay in step with us. Jiang Ch also pushed up his glasses from the side, forcing out the last shred of dignity. Song Yanhao is right. Even if you take the exam this morning, it's useless. Don't take the afternoon exam either. At worst, the four of us can repeat a year together next year, and our families will pay for it. I looked at the two lunatics, and my stomach churned violently. You're rotting and stinking on your own, and you still want to drag me down with you. I let out a cold laugh. Who do you think you are? What do you even amount to? Sorry, I'm not playing along. After saying that, I turned around directly and faced the reporters outside the cordon who were all worried about not having a sensational news angle. Dear reporters, I'm Song, a senior student in the Qingbei class at No 1 City High School. I raised my voice and pointed at the group outside the door. Do you want to know the truth? This isn't a protest at all. It was Gu Yanzhou, Zhang Ch, and Lu Xing, these three people, in order to satisfy the so-called separation anxiety of the girl they liked. Zhang Jingya used their family backgrounds to intimidate the security guards, forcibly locked the gates of the exam venue, and led the whole class in singing a farewell song. They even threatened classmates who wanted to enter the exam room with their family power. The entire venue fell into dead silence for an instant, and then the reporters' cameras went off in a flurry of click, click, click. What nonsense are you talking about? Song, shut up. Gu Yanzhou rushed toward me like a madman, trying to cover my mouth, whether I was talking nonsense or not. There are so many surveillance cameras around. Everything was captured clearly, I said coldly, sweeping my gaze over the group of classmates who had finally learned to fear. You accomplices, brainwashed by their privileges, really thought you could stand above the nation's college entrance exam rules? Now, are you satisfied? After hearing my words, the parents' eyes all turned red, and they all turned to stare furiously at Gu Yanzhou and the other two. If looks could kill, the three of them would already have been torn to pieces. Facing the parents' bloodthirsty glares, Gu Yanzhou and Lu Xing panicked completely, eager to clear themselves. They both turned around almost at the same time and viciously pointed at Zhang Jingya, who was trembling off to the side. It was her. It was all her forcing us. She was the one who insisted we stay and keep her company. Gu Yanzhou screamed hysterically, with not a trace left of his deep, affectionate CEO persona. Just as everyone's fury was about to engulf Jean Jingda, she suddenly stopped sobbing. Jean Jingya slowly stood up from the floor. She wiped the tear streaks from her face, and the timid look that had always been in her eyes was now unnaturally cold. She reached up and straightened her disheveled hair, a smile curling at the corners of her lips. Pretending to be a baby is really exhausting, but it was worth it to see you all looking like miserable stray dogs. Worse than dead. Her voice was no longer that sweet, syrupy baby voice. Every word she spoke clearly reached everyone's ears. Gu Yanzhou froze. Zhang Ch's hand stiffened in midair. The entire class looked at the girl in disbelief, as if she had instantly become a different person. You, what are you talking about? Lu Xing asked stammeringly. I'm saying, you fools, you're really ridiculous. Zhang Jingda swept a cold glance over the three childhood friends who had once held her in the palm of their hands. Do you really think I transferred here and hovered around you every day because I like spoiled young masters like you? She took a deep breath, and a fierce hatred erupted in her eyes. My brother, who was 13 years older than me, was called Lin Yuan. 3 years ago, the company he founded, Yuan Hang Technology, was about to go public. But the elders of your three families, in order to swallow up his technology, joined forces to set him up, cut off his funding chain, and even falsely accused him of commercial fraud. My brother was forced to the brink by you, and in order to leave me a clean sum of money, he jumped from the 28th floor. What does this have to do with us? That was a business war between adults, Gu Yanzhou argued. Is that so? Zhang Jingda stepped forward sharply, pointing at Gu Yanzhou's nose, then at the whole class behind him. After my brother died, the truth originally had a chance to come out. But you three, in order to protect your family's reputation, used your influence at school to lead the whole class into spreading wild rumors online. You posted that my brother was a scammer, that he killed himself out of guilt, that he was a deadbeat debtor. With your keyboards, you trampled on the last bit of dignity my brother had left. The faces of the classmates around them instantly turned pale, and some guilty lowered their heads. I remember now, in my first year of high school, there really was a class-wide online crusade campaign. Guangzhou and the others said they were punishing evil and promoting good, and they rallied the whole class to go control comments under a news post. Zhang Jingya was smiling, but tears were falling down her face. I can't do what my brother did and build a business empire to take revenge on your families, but I can trample hard on the most important part of your lives. You are all accomplices in killing my brother. Today I'm going to destroy the 12 years of hard work you put in. I want you to taste what it's like to fall from the clouds into the mud, to be driven to despair and madness. The scene fell into a deathly silence, with only the rustling of leaves in the wind. Those classmates who had been full of grievance just moments ago were now unable to utter a single word in rebuttal. Guyanzhou's eyes were bloodshot as he clenched his fists tightly, then suddenly whipped around and pointed at me. If the whole class is complicit, then why is Song allowed to enter the exam room? Zhang Jingya turned her head and looked at me standing inside the iron gate. The hatred in her eyes faded a little, replaced by a kind of calm because she didn't take part. Zhang Jingya said, word by word, when your whole class was cyberbullying my brother back then, only Song posted one sentence. I don't know the full story, so I won't comment. And when I first transferred here in my sophomore year, all of you were secretly mocking me for being pretentious and for having a fake voice only. Song, when I was hiding in the bathroom, gagging, handed me a tissue. The 3 childhood friends completely panicked. It was as if all their strength had suddenly been drained from them, and they looked at me with ashen faces. And at this moment I also remembered a long buried memory. It was the end of my first year of high school. One night my dad came home looking extremely grim. He looked at me as I was doing my homework and warned me in a very serious tone. And from now on, stay away from those boys from the Gu family and the Zhang family. The 3 families have become completely unscrupulous in their pursuit of money. Even if you grew up together, you need to keep your distance from them. They're rotten to the core. At the time, I thought Dad was just being a sore loser because he couldn't outcompete them in business. It turned out that Dad had long since seen through the filthy blood-soaked methods of their families, and through the viciousness hidden beneath their pampered exteriors. After learning the truth, Guangzhou, Zhang Ch, and Lu Xing, as if grasping at their last lifeline, rushed at me like madmen. Enan, listen to us. Guangzhou reached out, trying to grab the hem of my clothes, his face covered in tears and mucus. We were young and ignorant back then. We didn't tell you because we were afraid you'd think we were awful. We knew you were just person, and you'd definitely stop us. So we made the whole class keep it from you, and the ones who grew up with you. Zhang Ch no longer cared about his gold-rimmed glasses, and his voice trembled. Song, help us. Help us explain to the media that we were just confused for a moment. I looked at them coldly like I was staring at a pile of disgusting trash, and decisively took a step back to avoid their hands. Don't call me Ian. It makes me sick. I mercilessly shattered their last illusion. You're not afraid that I'll stop you. You're just rotten to the core, yet still want to put on a front in front of me. Now even thinking back to the times I spent with you as a child makes me feel physically nauseous. Stay in this filth and reflect on yourselves. The police quickly stepped forward and took Zhang Jingya away for investigation on suspicion of provoking trouble and disturbing public order. Zhang Jingya did not resist. The moment the handcuffs were put on her, she turned back and looked at me, a relieved smile on her lips. Although Guyanzhou, the other 2, and the whole class missed the Chinese exam, they were still allowed to take the subsequent exams. However, everything was already ruined. The immense blow of missing the first exam, combined with the cruel truth exposed by Zhang Jingya in public, completely shattered all of their psychological defenses in the afternoon math exam. Guangzhou's hand holding the pen had been shaking the whole time, and he couldn't even solve a basic fill-in-the-blank question on the exam floor. Zhang Ch suddenly lost control of his emotions, shouting and yelling until he was escorted out. Lu Xing even turned in a blank paper and collapsed on the desk, crying bitterly. Not just the 3 of them, but the entire Qingbei class, which had once prided itself on being the chosen ones, performed far below par. Even the top scorer's total was 150 points lower than in the usual mock exams, leaving them only barely able to get into an ordinary second-tier university. What was worse, the media outside the exam venue uploaded the day's interviews to the internet exactly as they had been recorded. The wealthy scion closed the door to the college entrance exam just to win a beauty smile. The hidden truth behind an entire top class at no one high school skipping the Gao campus cyberbullying, and a wealthy family bloodshed case. A few news reports instantly exploded across the internet. The anger of netizens completely engulfed them, and the names and photos of those students were dug up and exposed by online users. The once dazzling top students had become accomplices in online harassment reviled by the entire internet. Some couldn't bear the pressure and broke down in tears at home wanting to repeat a year. However, none of the somewhat better high schools in the city were willing to accept this group of students with records extremely poor mental resilience and a whole mess of trouble surrounding them. They had originally had a bright future ahead of them, able to spend their youth freely at a top university. But because of their own arrogance, blind conformity, and malice, they shatter their future with their own hands. Karma is a wheel that turns unerringly. 3 years later, that ridiculous Gauka farce had long since become the talk of the city over tea. And those 3 childhood friends, once so arrogant and overbearing, had also completely plunged into their own separate abysses because the lock-the-door incident had such an appalling impact. Lu Xing not only dragged the family business into a sharp plunge in market value, but was also completely stripped of his inheritance rights after his illegitimate younger brother took his place. He cut off Lu Xing's source of income. I heard that he now hangs around shabby bars all day and has become a bum who lives off other people's charity, cursing heaven and earth at anyone he meets. Although Zhang Che was sent abroad by his family at great expense to a diploma mill, he simply could not withstand the pressure of public opinion back home and the loneliness of being in a foreign country, and before long he completely degenerated into a life of partying and debauchery overseas. As for Guyanzhou, although his younger brother was hopelessly useless, he still ended up staying at the Gu family's company, but his meager education and the foolish things he had done back then became a permanent laughingstock among his business rivals at the business table. No one was willing to work with an idiot who locked the exam hall doors for a woman, and the Gu family's business deteriorated day by day, gradually falling into the ranks of second-rate companies. As for Zhang Jingya, she was detained for a few days back then for disrupting the order of the exam hall. After she was released, she organized all the evidence and publicly cleared her brother's name online, completely vindicating Lin Yuan. She never took the college entrance exam again on the anniversary of her brother's death. She chose to swallow pills and end her life, going to be with the brother who had raised her forever. When I heard the news, my feelings were mixed and complicated. In my past life, I was indirectly killed because of her, but in this life, after learning her story, I deeply admired her from the bottom of my heart. She lay low for a full 3 years to avenge her brother, giving up the best years of her life, and in the most ruthless way possible, carrying out a revenge that was entirely her own. And I, after breaking free from those rotten people's shackles, was able to bring my full strength to bear. Not only did I become the city's top scorer that year, I also earned a full scholarship in college, successfully secured a recommended place in graduate school, and began the truly vast and brilliant life that was mine to live. Later, Guangzhou somehow found out where I lived. He was driving a battered Mercedes and blocked my way home from work. The one-spirited young master now had sunken eyes and a weathered face with re-ined eyes. He pulled a cheap diamond ring from his pocket and even made as if to kneel before me, begging for my forgiveness, saying he had finally realized that only I was worth marrying. I didn't lose my temper. I couldn't even be bothered to spare him another look. I simply walked around him calmly, like avoiding a foul-smelling puddle. I will not forgive them, and I will always look down on them. We were destined to be people from 2 different worlds. They were only fit to keep rotting in the cesspit they had dug with their own hands. On a weekend morning, the breeze was gentle and warm. I bought a bouquet of pure white lilies and came to the cemetery on the outskirts of the city. I stood before Han Jinjia's gravestone, looking at the girl in the photo, unmasked and smiling with a clean, untroubled brightness, and gently placed the flowers down. Thanks for the warning, and I hope you and your brother will be happy over there. I said softly, from this day on, I will leave all the gloom surrounding these people completely in the past. I turned around and strode out of the cemetery in the sunlight at the cemetery gate. My husband was standing beside the car, holding a cup of hot latte I loved most, smiling at me warmly. I quickened my pace and held his hand tightly. The road ahead was still long, and I was about to head toward the perfect life that belonged to me. After hearing the first story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comment section. Next, there's another similar story. Let's continue to see. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back in the 1980s, in a home that was destitute, with my parents staging a fake divorce in their quest for a son. My father held a stick, pretending to drive us, my mother, and me, away. But this time, he actually struck my mother with the stick. My mother angrily said, "Leanna, wasn't it agreed to be a fake divorce? You actually hit me for real." In my previous life, my parents divorced under false pretenses to have a second child. However, my mother was caught secretly giving birth to a second child, and they said the divorce certificate wasn't even processed, clearly indicating it was fake. There was no way out. My grandparents passed away early, and my father couldn't afford to remarry. So, how could he dare to truly divorce? My father beat my mother severely with a stick, coldly saying, "You wretched woman, I'm going to divorce you for real, and take your burden, and get out." I shuddered, and I knew my father must have been reborn too in my previous life when he had no money. The thing he regretted most was forcing my mother to the brink of madness and death just to have a son in his old age after becoming the richest man in the county. His greatest regret was having no son, forcing him to pass on hundreds of millions in assets to me unexpectedly. The first thing he did upon being reborn was not to make amends to my mother, but to drive her away along with me. He really is ruthless. I didn't step forward to save my mother, only pretending to cry with my hands over my head. I knew that my mother, with her infatuated mindset, wouldn't wake up until my father gave her a severe beating. In my previous life, she had several miscarriages trying to give my father a son, and when she finally gave birth to a daughter, my father made her strangle the baby herself after she killed her daughter. She had nightmares every day, went mad, and eventually jumped into the river and drowned. My mother's desperate screams and my own cries alerted the villagers, and someone called the village head. My father looked too fierce, holding a stick in his hand. It was harvest season, and all the strong men were busy in the fields, leaving only the elderly, women, and children behind. No one dared to step forward to help my mother. The village chief shouted at the entrance of the village, "Lua, you'll go to jail if someone dies. Think carefully." Only then did my father stop, threw the stick to the ground, and kicked my mother again. The village chief angrily asked my father if he was the first in the village to beat his wife, and if he really wanted a divorce from my mother. My father's attitude was firm. "Divorce. It must happen, and the child will be with my mother." The village head was also a fair person, saying that if my parents really wanted a divorce, the large brick house at my grandmother's place would belong to my mother. Moreover, most of the family property would go to my mother. Given our family's poverty, 2/3 of the rice and fields will be given to my mother, and all the livestock will belong to her. Furthermore, my father will have to pay child support for me until I turn 18. My father agreed without hesitation. My grandmother's house and my paternal grandmother were in the same brigade. After the two elders passed away, our family lived at my grandmother's house, just a mile away from my paternal grandmother's dilapidated home. To my surprise, my father would rather return to the old rundown house than stay married to my mother. My mother, having been beaten severely, also made a firm decision. She begged the village head to help us divide the family belongings, and went with my father to get the divorce certificate. When I returned from the divorce, my mother threw my father's clothes out the door, gave him 2 baskets of rice, and told him to store the rice properly and return the baskets. That afternoon, my father carried the baskets to Widow Wang's house next to the old home. I remember in my previous life, when my parents pretended to divorce and returned to the old house, Widow Wang kept trying to seduce my father, but he always refused. Later, Widow Wang married to a town nearby, gave birth to twin sons, and my father talked about it for a long time. This life, it seems, is fulfilling their wishes. Somehow, I find myself thinking again about the moment before my death in my previous life. I never married because my father said that the men pursuing me only wanted his money, and he forbade me from marrying. Yet, Despite his words about leaving his inheritance to me, he tricked me into drinking poisoned wine on his deathbed. Now that we are both dead, to whom should that money belong? I shivered all over. My mother was crying nonstop next door while I was doing something even more important. Copying the genealogy. My father must never have expected that I too had been reborn. He wanted to divorce me before I could read, so he could give all the great benefits to his and Widow Wang's son. Not a chance. I picked up the charcoal and yellow paper to copy a bit, but I quickly lost patience. What's the point of copying? Will you even recognize it later after reading those pages? They left a deep impression on me. After all, in my previous life, it was me who took my father to find the place. He was already in his 70s or 80s when he died, so he couldn't possibly remember it more clearly than I do. I carefully checked and found that these pages were not part of the genealogy, but were secretly included by my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather had secretly hidden many valuable things in a family tomb before he died. He repeatedly instructed my father to secretly retrieve them, but not to take too much at once. But my father, who never studied properly as a child and couldn't read, coupled with his timid nature, never dared to dig for them or had the connections to sell them. So when I got into high school and couldn't afford the tuition, he finally let me take him to dig for them. I remember later he went to the city, sold those items at an antique market, and earned his first pot of gold. Then, riding the wave of reform and opening up, he opened a wholesale store, started a factory, and gradually expanded, eventually becoming the richest person in the county with assets worth hundreds of millions. With a firm heart, I carefully tore out these pages, memorized the content repeatedly, and without hesitation, folded them neatly and tucked them under the tile that served as a table-like support. My small desk was still the one my mother used when she was a child, but now it was much more stable. The next morning, just as the sky began to lighten, I was awakened by a series of urgent knocks on the door. Sure enough, it was my father arriving with 2 empty baskets. My mother said viciously that she would never forgive my father, and he should give up that hope. Who should really give up hope? She has no idea at all. My father pushed my mother aside and walked straight into the study, which was the room my grandfather had prepared for me with all the books inside. My mother, in order to fill the bookshelves, even put the genealogy in there. My father cradled several genealogy books in his arms as if they were treasures, leaving without looking back. My mother was both angry and anxious, cursing at the door for a long time, but he never even turned to look at her. Seeing my father's back, I couldn't help but laugh. Having been given a second chance at life, had he become senile? Had he forgotten what truly mattered? If I were him, the first thing I'd do after being reborn would be to secure the genealogy books, not rush into divorce and having more children. I must admit, I'm quite looking forward to seeing his reaction when he realizes that I've tampered with the genealogy and he can't find anything. My mother has a flaw. Whenever she's in a bad mood, she works herself to the bone, literally destroying herself with bruises and marks all over her body. She seems to have already forgotten how painful yesterday's beating was. After breakfast, she grabbed a hoe and was about to head out. I asked her where she was going, and she said she was going to till the fields. Why dig the fields right after the autumn harvest? I sighed and told my mother that the dried-up well behind the house was connected to a piece of barren land, and since no one wanted it, it would be better to dig it deeper and turn it into a small fish pond. Even if we couldn't raise fish, we could raise ducks or geese. My mother was feeling depressed and didn't ask why. She really went to the back of the house to start digging. Our area still had quite a bit of farmland. The paddy fields were allocated by the production team, and whoever cultivated the barren hills and lands owned them, especially this piece of land, which was next to our house and had originally belonged to my grandparents. The villagers watched my mother digging the land under the scorching sun, not bothering to persuade her, only secretly feeling sorry for her. Everyone in the village knew about her and my father's situation. There were many people in the village who divorced for the sake of their children, and the village head and others turned a blind eye as long as the family planning office didn't catch them. But my father was so ruthless, not only beating people, but also getting a divorce certificate and then going to Widow Wang's house, clearly not joking around. My mother toiled day and night for several days while I just squatted in the shade under a tree and watched. She wasn't foolish either. When the sun was high, she knew to work under the shade of a tree. A few days later, she finally couldn't keep going and didn't get up in the morning, sleeping in at home. As for me, I left early with a hoe on my shoulder, busying myself in the abandoned well. This abandoned well wasn't without water. Someone had intentionally blocked the water source, most likely hoping my parents would give up, allowing him to reclaim it for himself. Because after my mother passed away, Li Wanhua, with my father's consent, dug out water from the abandoned well, connecting it to the barren fields to form a fish pond. Even without adding fish fry, fish naturally entered the pond from the groundwater. After fiddling around in the abandoned well for a long time, I finally found a large stone. Wow, this person had quite a bit of strength. After digging beside it for a long time, the stone finally loosened, using all my strength as a 5 or 6-year-old. And with the lever principle I had learned before, I finally flipped the stone over at the bottom of the 2 m wide dry well, revealing the water outlet below, which gradually became damp. For safety, I dug a few more holes, and only when I saw water gushing out from below did I climb back up and return home. When I got home, my mother was still asleep. I planned to light a fire myself and cook some porridge. I was too hungry. Unfortunately, having not lit a fire for too long, I had forgotten the art of cooking. And despite lighting several matches, the fire just wouldn't catch. It was so difficult to light the fire, and the wood wouldn't catch, leaving me with a face full of smoke. I was on the verge of tears. Just then, someone knocked on the door. It was Li Wanhua, the village head. Could it be that he took notice because of the wasteland and the dry well that my mother and I were working on? He smiled, patted my head, and asked me where my mother had gone. I said, "My mother is still sleeping." His face suddenly changed drastically, and he asked which room my mother was in. I pointed, and he rushed in. I followed him into my mother's room. On such a hot day, my mother was actually covered with a blanket, and I finally realized something was wrong. Li Wanhua threw back the quilt, and beneath my mother there was a pool of bright red blood. I was terrified. Li Wanhua picked up my mother and told me to wash my face and follow. I quickly fetched a basin of water, and only then realized that my face was completely blackened by the smoke. I quickly washed my face and caught up with Li Wanhua. He had already reached the village entrance, borrowing a plank cart from the village chief's house and placing my mother on it. I climbed onto the plank cart and saw my father from afar standing on a slope, embracing Widow Wang and watching the commotion. I silently vowed that this life would leave him with nothing. The hospital's examination results came out quickly. My mother had just suffered a miscarriage from overwork, lost too much blood, and fainted, but with some rest, she would recover and could still have children. However, the doctor suggested that my mother get an IUD. Without hesitation, my mother refused. Li Wanhua looked at my mother and suddenly said, "Fang, after all this, do you still want to have a child for him?" My mother's eyes turned red as she said, "I don't want to have a child for him. But can't I have one for you? What's going on?" I clearly remember that Li Wanhua was the first college student in our village. After graduating from university, he returned without accepting the assigned job and became the village head. In his previous life, he never remarried and barely spoke to my mother. How did he suddenly become like this? What will happen to me if they have a child together? My mother held my hand and said, "Call him Dad. He's your real father." What? Li Jianhua isn't my real father. My real father is actually Li Wanhua, the man I've never spoken to my entire life. I must be hearing things. I shook my head vigorously. Li Wanhua cooped my face, tears uncontrollably streaming down as he choked out, "It's me. I'm sorry to you. And your mother." My mother said that she had secretly been in a relationship with Li Wanhua before, but he went to university in another city. At that time, college students were not allowed to get married, unable to do anything about it, for the sake of the baby in her womb. Me. My mother had no choice but to marry Lion Hua out of guilt towards Lion Hua. My mother always wanted to have another child for him, regardless of whether it was a boy or a girl, just to give him one, since Li Jian was so heartless. My mother had no choice but to work herself to the bone to abort the child in her womb. I never expected that in my previous life. My mother and my biological father were so tight-lipped. If it weren't for being reborn, I would never have imagined that my real father was someone else. Suddenly, I felt that Lai Jian was quite pitiful in his previous life, working so hard to raise me, only to find out I wasn't his biological child. By the time my mother was discharged from the hospital and returned home, rumors were already flying all over the village. The most absurd rumor was that my mother had an affair with Li Wana, which led to her being driven out, and she even caused Lion's children to miss. No one seems to remember the scene from a few days ago when my mother was working herself to death in the fields. The village chief said that since the two had divorced, it was normal for them to remarry. Since Lai Jianhe had married Widow Wang, it was only natural for my mother to marry Li Wanhua. Under the village chief's persuasion, Li Yanhua and Widow Wang got their marriage certificate, and my mother and my biological father also got their marriage certificate. Afraid of gossip from the village, for a long time, I didn't dare to call my biological father Dad. In the end, it was the village head who made the decision, allowing me to call him Dad, and changed to calling Liana Uncle. Naturally, Lai Jian was overjoyed as this meant he no longer had to pay for my upbringing after school started. My father wanted to enroll me in preschool, but the teacher said I was already 6 years old and could start first grade. Originally, he came to my house a few days ago to persuade my mother to send me to school in my previous life. He also came to my house wanting to persuade me to study, but was scolded by Lai Jianhua. The following year, he came to our house multiple times before finally convincing Lai Jian to send me to school. And so, the fortunate me, 1 year earlier than in my previous life, started first grade. This is good, too. So, I can avoid those troublesome classmates and experiences from my past life, but I still couldn't escape. One day, halfway through class, a classmate suddenly started vomiting violently, spewing out a floor full of worms. Even though I had lived for decades in my previous life, I still couldn't help but retch in the corner. Even after changing to a different class, I still received the same treatment as in my previous life. A few people quickly came over to check if I had vomited out worms. Fortunately, this time around, I didn't vomit out worms. It was just nausea. When I got home, I told my parents I wanted to eat peyote candy. In my previous life, I vomited out worms at school, and it was Lai Jian who bought me worm medicine once. After that, I only took it when the school provided it. In this life, my mother didn't go away to avoid having a second child. She laughed and said, "How could I forget such an important thing?" Then she had my father buy a large bag of packet sugar. My father tidied up the dry fields and the dried up well behind the house, turning them into a fish pond. He said that before he left, he had noticed the well was about to start producing water, so he blocked it with stones, planning to wait until he returned to clear the land with my mother and turn it into a fish pond unexpectedly. Upon returning, I found that my mother had remarried and had no interest in managing things. I just smiled and said nothing. I remember clearly that in my previous life after my mother passed away, he still took over the dry well and the wasteland for my father, built a fish pond, and even set up a fish shack nearby for some reason. I also felt that he was quite pitiful in his previous life. In the winter, my mother became pregnant, and Widow Wang also became pregnant. The villagers said they often saw Li Jian while wandering around the desolate hills at night, likely intending to go hunting. I knew he wasn't planning to go hunting. He wanted to rely on his memory to find that ancestral grave. I thought that besides me, no one else should know the location of that grave because it was an abandoned grave located on a hillside. A few stones were exposed outside as markers overgrown with weeds. If not for the map, no one would have thought that there were treasures inside. Since he was leaving at night, I figured I would leave in the morning and see who could get the treasures inside first. As long as I moved a little bit out each day, I could empty it all, leaving him with nothing. Having made up my mind, I got up secretly at around 5 a.m. The next morning, left the house, and sneaked towards a desolate mountain. The barren mountain is vast, overgrown with weeds and shrubs, neglected and unmanaged. accessible only in winter when it's free of snakes, insects, and rodents. If not for the confidence of having lived several decades in my previous life, I wouldn't have dared to come alone. After wandering in the mountains for nearly 2 hours, it was already dawn when I finally found the location of the ancestral grave. I moved aside the tangled weeds, pushed open the wooden door with a green stone slab, creating a small gap, and was about to slip inside. A strong arm grabbed my hand. Oh no! My heart skipped a beat. Could it be Li Jianhua? I turned my head and saw my biological father glaring at me angrily. Lai, why aren't you studying? And running here for? I whispered softly, but I didn't know how to explain. My biological father pulled me behind him, skillfully pushed open the tomb door, walked in, pointed to the 2 bags on the ground, and asked me how I knew about them. I didn't say a word. My biological father opened 2 sacks. One contained gold bars, silver ingots, and copper coins, while the other held paper, which I guess were old banknotes or silver receipts, now rotted. He said he also had a genealogy with an address, and these items were meant to be shared equally between him and Lai Jian. However, since Lion Hua had no sense of honor and wanted to take them secretly, he wouldn't hold back. So, he took away the bag of gold and silver jewelry, leaving behind a bag of waste paper for Liana. Then, he closed the tomb door, covered it with weeds, told me to go study, and he himself picked up the sack and left. He repeatedly urged me never to let anyone else know, especially Lai Hua, that these things no one else should ever get their hands on. On the way to school, I kept thinking about one thing. In my previous life, maybe my biological father always knew about the existence of those things, and how Lai Jianhua had become successful. But he has been staying in the countryside guarding his fish pond without a single word. Is it really just because those things were ill-gotten gains? Is it possible that in his previous life, he knew those things would eventually be mine, so he chose to remain silent? Did he say that no one should get them, intending to hand the items over? I can already imagine not long from now, my dad wearing a little red flower and receiving an award certificate. When I returned home for lunch at noon, my dad seemed as if nothing had happened. After lunch, he told me to go to the back of the house and feed the ducks in the fish pond. After feeding the ducks, I went to wash my hands at the location of the old dry well, and was surprised to find that my dad had made a circle enclosing the area around the well, and had also surrounded many duckweed and water plants there. I laughed. It really was a case of this place has no silver worth 300 taels. The second year, my mother gave birth to a sister, and my parents loved her immensely, naming her Lion, and Lai Jian really did give birth to twin sons, naming them Li Long and Li Hu. Lai Jian strutted around all day walking as if with the wind. He leveraged his memories of the past life to set up a stall in town and started a business. As for my parents, they expanded the family fish pond, stopped raising ducks, focused entirely on fish farming, and also cleared a piece of barren land to plant fruit trees, mushrooms, and sell tofu. By the time I reached middle school, Lai Jian had built the first 2-story house in the village with the money he earned from business. My parents were not to be outdone either, and they built a 2-story house right next to ours. The villagers all laughed at my parents, saying that raising 2 daughters and building a 2-story house who would live in it, Lai Jianhua said in the village that he was my real father, and that after my parents were gone, the house would belong to his son. He really dared to think that Li Long and Li Hu, along with their sister, Xingyan, went to school together, but they always bullied Jingyan. One day, I happened to see them on the road and gave the 2 brats a good beating. The 2 kids cried and went home to tattle to their parents. Widow Wang came to my house, throwing a tantrum and rolling on the floor until the village chief gave her a scolding, and she finally went back obediently. After that, Genshin never walked with them again. Lai Jianhua constantly called me an ingrate, probably thinking that since I was his biological child, I should be grateful for all the hard work he put into raising me in my previous life, and for passing down so much family property to me. If it weren't for him, how would I have died early and been reborn? I hate him to death. Li Long and Li Hu seem to have no talent for studying. Every exam, the 2 of them together don't even score 60 points. but they are quite skilled at stealing chickens and dogs. One day, I noticed that the old desk in the house started to wobble, and I realized something was wrong. Several pages under the desk had been taken away without my knowing. When, if I'm not mistaken, it must be Ligiana who discovered something amiss with the genealogy and had the two kids secretly fined and take it away. The paper shouldn't be that good after so many years, right? It should have rotted away by now, right before the summer vacation. After the high school entrance exam was even half over, I saw Liana standing at my doorstep covered in dirt, asking if I had touched anything in the ancestral grave. My father stood in front of me and asked him, "Which ancestral grave? What thing?" "The whole village is surnamed Lee, and if there's anything in the old ancestral grave, it should be shared equally by the whole village." Liana panicked and said, "Nothing. There's nothing." A few days later, Lua was severely beaten and lay at home. My father took 200 yuan and some fruit to visit him. They spoke with the door closed. My mother didn't come, and Genshin went out to play. I crouched by the room door and couldn't help but eavesdrop on a few sentences. Originally, Lai Jianhua was set up and lost the shop in town due to gambling. Wanting to recoup his losses, he went to tamper with the items in the ancestral grave. Unexpectedly, all he found in the grave was a bag of waste paper. My father scolded him a few times, and then said he wanted to go home. He grabbed my father's hand and asked if he could borrow some money to try and win back his losses. My father told him to forget about it, not only because they didn't have the money, but even if they did, no one would lend it to him for gambling. Unexpectedly, Lian Hua, who had been given a second chance at life, got involved in gambling. It seems he really has lost his mind. When the holidays ended, my dad sent me to the city to attend high school, saying, "What's good about the county high schools? The city ones are much better." Everyone laughed at him, saying that it was already good enough for a girl from the village to attend high school, let alone sending her to the city. It was as if he had money to burn. In my previous life, even though I helped Lai Jianhua find the ancestral grave, and he took something from it to exchange for money, he only let me attend high school in the town after graduating from high school. He had me help him manage his store, then his factory, and then his entire business. It was as if I were a free laborer. I'm not sure if it was because the high school in the city was better or if reading for a second time gave me more insight. But my grades were much better than in my previous life. I was just a hair's breadth away from securing a guaranteed spot at Tsinghua or Peking University. In the end, I was admitted to another university that I was quite fond of. On the day I received my admission notice, my parents were in high spirits and treated the entire village to a feast. Lai Jian was drunk and proudly proclaimed, "That's my daughter." But the whole village laughed at him because he had already driven me away. He only had 2 sons. I was the daughter of Li Wanhe. In the end, it was his 2 sons who helped him back home. After graduating from university, I returned to the city to work, wanting to be closer to my parents. Jensen had good academic performance and also enrolled in high school in the city. As for Li Long and Lu, like my previous life, they couldn't afford to go to high school because their father spent all day drinking and gambling. Widow Wang was always either cursing Lai Jian for being a scoundrel or crying about her bad luck. Losing her husband was bad enough, but being with a man like Lai Jian was worse than being a widow. Fortunately, Li Long and Li, who had poor academic performance and didn't like studying, so they dropped out after middle school and spent their days loafing around. The whole village feared them because 3 make a gang. The 3 of them, father and sons, spent their days together stealing chickens and dogs, causing widespread complaints throughout the town. Eventually, after multiple educational sessions at the police station, Li Long and Li, who finally agreed to go out and find work, but they were too well known, and no factory in the area would hire them in the end. They went to work at a glass factory in the county town. At work, I met someone who shared my ideals and brought him home. My parents said, as long as I liked him, it was fine. In this life, I got married and had 2 children. When I gave birth to my second child, our unit downsized, and both my husband and I were laid off. My parents used their savings to support us in learning how to do business. I remembered my previous life managing a factory and acquired a small glass factory. As for my husband, with his good English and trade skills, he opened an online store specializing in wholesale and export. In just a few years, our factory and trading company took off, not much smaller than Lai Jianu's factory in my previous life. Li Long and Li Hu tried several times to get jobs at our factory, but were turned down each time. My parents said that Lai Jian often got drunk and would go crazy near the glass factory in town, claiming that the factory was rightfully his. Li Long and Li Hu wanted to send him to a mental hospital, but they were unwilling to spend the money. Wan the widow also grew tired of Lai Jianhua, refusing to let him in the house or feed him. He knelt at the door several times, promising never to gamble or drink again, before she finally allowed him inside. From then on, he lived like a zombie, obediently, following Wan the widow's orders, doing whatever she told him to. After my husband and I made money in the city, we wanted to bring our parents to live with us, but they absolutely refused to leave the countryside, refusing to abandon the fish pond. After graduating from university, Jingjun returned to the countryside with her boyfriend, saying that contracting fruit trees and fish ponds in the countryside was far better than the 996 grind in the city. After Li Long and Li Hu got married, they lived in the county town and only returned home during major holidays. On the day I died in my previous life, it was New Year's Eve. My husband and I were at my parents' house making dumplings with the kids. Jinzhen and her husband were discussing what delicious and profitable fruits to grow after the new year, while the children played with flour just as we were about to set off fireworks after preparing the meal. We heard someone else in the neighborhood set off fireworks even earlier than us. My husband and I still had to go to my in-laws' place for the New Year's Eve dinner in the evening, so we only ate at my parents' house for lunch. Logically, we should have been the first family in the village to have our New Year's meal. To our surprise, someone was even earlier than us. Halfway through our meal, we heard the sound of an ambulance, and everyone ran out to watch the commotion. It turned out to be Lion Hua, feeling that his life was coming to an end. He secretly laced the dumplings with poison. Everyone in his family fell ill, except for him. Fortunately, the timely discovery meant that apart from Widow Wang, who was older and had eaten more, requiring a few days in the hospital, everyone else was successfully resuscitated on the same day. But each one suffered through stomach pumping and induced vomiting. After the new year, Widow Wang was taken to the city by her two sons, leaving Lion Hua alone in the village. Li Jianhua didn't die like he did in his previous life. Instead, he seemed to have a sudden burst of energy, looking very lively. He spent all day spouting nonsense in the village, one moment claiming he was a tycoon who had poisoned his daughter and given all his wealth to his twin sons. Then he would say that there was clearly a bag of gold in his family's ancestral grave. So how did it turn into a bag of waste paper? Then he would claim that if he died, he would definitely be reborn, and he was sure to become a tycoon. I think that if he hadn't gambled, perhaps with the experiences from his previous life, he could have become the richest person in the county without needing the treasures from the ancestral grave. But with him in this crazy state now, even if he were to live again, he might end up worse than in this life. In my previous life, I didn't enter that tomb, so I didn't know what was inside. But hearing Lai Jian was ramblings, I can't help but wonder if it's possible that my real father also reincarnated in his previous life. He took away that sack of waste paper and left the gold and silver to Lua. After all, leaving it to Liana was the same as leaving it to his own daughter. But this time he directly chose the bag of gold and silver, threw them into the well, and left the bag of waste paper in the tomb. After Li Jian's death, my father still donated everything from the well. He said that keeping these things would only harm people. I once tried to ask my father about the previous life, but he always said that it was not good for a young person to live in the present and think blindly all day. Was it really just my imagination? True, having been given a second chance, all the wealth was earned through the hard work of both my husband and me. The happiness of my parents and sister's family was also the result of their labor. Why should I dwell on my past life after hearing the second story above? What are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comment section. End. Story 2. My hands used to bleed from pulling him out of the mud. I gave up my college fund, my sleep, my entire 20s, just to watch him marry the girl who almost ruined him. Today, I woke up 10 years in the past. This time, I'm letting him drown. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't the sterile, lavender-scented hospital room where I had spent my last waking moments listening to the monotonous beep of a heart monitor that no one was coming to visit. Instead, it was the pungent, unmistakable stench of industrial floor wax, cheap teenage cologne, and the metallic tang of radiator heat. I blinked, my eyelashes scraping against the dry surface of my eyes. The blinding fluorescent lights above hummed, with a low, persistent electrical buzz that vibrated right into the base of my skull. I was sitting at a desk. The surface was a faux wood veneer, sticky in the bottom left corner where someone had scraped off a piece of ancient gum. My hands, my 30-year-old hands that had been calloused from years of double shifts, and scarred from a kitchen grease fire I started, while exhausted, were smooth. The cuticles weren't bitten down to the quick. I inhaled sharply, the air catching in my throat, and looked to my right. Lucius was asleep. He was slouched over his AP government textbook, his cheeks smushed against a glossy page about the legislative branch. A thin string of drool pooled near his mouth. He wore that faded gray zip-up hoodie, the one with the frayed cuffs that I would eventually mend for him over and over, because he claimed we couldn't afford new clothes, while he was studying for his LSATs. Looking at him didn't trigger the explosive cinematic rage I always thought I'd feel if I saw him again. There was no roaring in my ears, just a cold, heavy stone dropping into the pit of my stomach, settling in my intestines like bad meat. I remember the last time I saw him. We were 28. We stood in the foyer of the house I had paid the down payment for, the house he was now kicking me out of. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit that I had picked up from the dry cleaners that very morning. He hadn't yelled. That was the worst part. He had just looked at me, with this exhausted, pitying expression like I was a stray dog that had overstayed its welcome. "You suffocated me, Cynthia," he had said, adjusting his watch, a Rolex his new firm had gifted him. "You didn't save me. You just managed me. You kept me from the life I was supposed to have. You kept me from her. Her. Harper." I dragged my eyes away from Lucius's sleeping face and looked toward the front of the classroom. There she was, Harper Montgomery. She sat 2 rows ahead, her blonde hair falling in a perfect, careless cascade down her back. She smelled like expensive vanilla bean and something faintly floral. She was chewing on the plastic cap of a pink gel pen, laughing silently at something the boy next to her whispered. In my first life, Harper had been a localized hurricane. She was beautiful, bored, and entirely destructive. She collected boys like charms on a bracelet, wearing them out until they lost their academic standings, their athletic scholarships, their minds. Lucius had been her target our senior year. In that life, I had seen the signs. I had intercepted the notes. I had physically dragged Lucius to the library when he wanted to ditch school to smoke behind the bleachers. With her crowd, I did his homework so he wouldn't fail. I swallowed my own pride, skipped my own art portfolio deadlines, and took extra shifts at the diner to pay for his college application fees. Because his dad had drank his away, I built Lucius homes from the ground up, brick by brick, sacrificing pieces of my own foundation to do it. And 10 years later, after he passed the bar and made partner, he reconnected with Harper. They had an affair for 6 months in the very bed I bought. When I found out, he didn't apologize. He blamed me for stealing his true fate. A sudden squeak of rubber soles on the linoleum snapped me back to the present. Mr. Harrison, our history teacher, was turning his back to write on the chalkboard. The chalk tapped out a staccato rhythm that seemed to echo inside my hollow chest. October 14th. I looked down at the corner of my notebook. I had doodled the date in blue ink. The realization washed over me, chilling the sweat that was beginning to prickle at the back of my neck. October 14th was the day. It was the catalyst. It was the day Harper slipped the pale pink envelope onto Lucius' desk. The love letter. The invitation to a party at her parents' empty cabin. The party where 2 kids got arrested. And where Lucius, in my previous life, had almost gone before I intercepted the note, and lied to him saying the party was canceled. I stared at the space between my desk And Lucius's. The aisle felt like a canyon. My lungs expanded, pulling in a deep, shaky breath. I wasn't dead. I wasn't in the hospital. The universe, in some sick, twisted joke, had rewound the tape and dropped me right back at the exact moment I ruined my own life by trying to save his. I slowly uncurled my fingers. I placed my hands flat on the cool, sticky surface of my desk. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for a decade, the constant, buzzing anxiety of keeping Lucius on track, was suddenly gone. A dark, quiet amusement began to bubble up in my throat. I pressed my lips together to keep from smiling a very ugly, very bitter smile. You want your true fate, Lucius, I thought, watching his chest rise and fall as he slept through the education I would later pay for. You can have it. The bell was going to ring in exactly 4 minutes. The collective energy in the room was shifting. A restless shuffling of backpacks and the clicking of 3-ring binders. Mr. Harrison wiped a streak of chalk dust from his slacks, giving up on the last 10 minutes of his lecture. Read chapter 4 tonight. There will be a quiz. And no, Holmes, you can't sleep through it this time. A few kids chuckled. Lucius shifted, grumbling something incoherent into his textbook, but didn't lift his head. Up front, Harper stood. She stretched, a calculated arch of her back that drew the eyes of at least 4 guys in the immediate vicinity. She slung her designer tote over her shoulder and began walking down our aisle. My heart didn't race. That was the strangest part. The last time this happened, my pulse had drummed frantically against my ribs. I had been terrified of losing him. I had operated on a desperate, adrenaline-fueled instinct to protect my territory. Now, my heart beat at a slow, lazy rhythm. Harper walked past my desk. The scent of vanilla hit me, cloying and heavy. She didn't even look at me. To her, I was invisible, just the quiet, frumpy girl who orbited Lucius. As she brushed past Lucius's desk, her hand dropped seamlessly. A thick, pale pink envelope slid from her fingers and landed softly against the spine of his AP government book right next to his face. She kept walking out the door, without missing a beat. The letter. It sat there, glaringly bright against the dull gray of the desk. The paper was expensive, heavy cardstock. I could see the faint indents of her handwriting on the front, spelling out his name in loopy, exaggerated cursive. Lucius. Muscle memory is a terrifying thing. Before my conscious brain could stop it, my right hand twitched, my fingers extended, brushing the edge of the pink paper. It would be so easy to slide it off the desk, crumple it into the depths of my canvas backpack, and let him wake up none the wiser. I could ask him to study after school. I could buy him a cheap burger, listen to him complain about his dad, and slowly mold him back into the safe, successful man who would eventually abandon me. My fingertips rested lightly on the envelope. The texture of the paper felt rough against my skin. I looked at Lucius's face. He looked so young. The lines of stress that would later carve themselves into his forehead weren't there yet. The smug, entitled set of his jaw hadn't fully formed. For a fraction of a second, a pathetic, bruised part of my soul whispered, "Maybe this time you can fix him better. Maybe if you just love him harder." Then I remembered the smell of the rain on the asphalt the night he locked me out. I remembered the texture of the cardboard boxes I had to pack my entire life into, while watched from the leather sofa I bought. I remembered the absolute chilling void in his eyes when he told me I was a burden. My fingers curled. I didn't grab the letter. Instead, I nudged it. I pushed the pink envelope directly into the center of his desk, moving it out of the shadows of his textbook so it was bathed in the harsh fluorescent light. I positioned it perfectly, impossible to miss. Then, I pulled my hand back and wiped my fingertips on my jeans as if the paper had left a greasy residue. The bell screamed through the classroom. Lucius jolted awake, knocking his textbook off the desk. With a heavy thud, he rubbed his face, his eyes bleary and unfocused, leaving a red impression on his cheek where the book's binding had dug into his skin. He groaned, bending down to pick up the book. When he sat back up, his eyes landed immediately on the pink envelope. I watched him from my peripheral vision. I wanted to see every micro-expression. I wanted to burn it into my memory. He stared at it for a second, his brow furrowed in confusion. He glanced around the room, then looked at me. "Did you leave this?" he asked. his voice thick, with sleep and irritation. "No," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It wasn't the soft, accommodating tone I usually used. With him, it was flat, dead. Harper dropped it. The shift in his demeanor was instantaneous. The sleepiness vanished, replaced by an electric jolt of adrenaline. His posture straightened. The irritation melted into a look of disbelief, followed rapidly by a slow-blooming smirk of pure ego. He wiped his mouth, suddenly self-conscious of the drool, and grabbed the envelope. He tore it open, with eager, clumsy fingers. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. "Cabin party. Tonight. Bring booze if you can. Don't bring the watchdog." He read it twice. A flush of heat crept up his neck, coloring the skin above his collar. He looked up, his eyes darting toward the classroom door. Even though Harper was already long gone, he looked hungry. He folded the letter carefully, treating it like a fragile artifact, and slid it into the front pocket of his jeans. "Hey," he said, turning to me. He was already packing his bag, his movements hurried and erratic. "I can't do the math homework. With you tonight, something came up. In my past life, this was the moment I would have pleaded. I would have asked what was wrong, offered to come over, offered to help. I would have made myself small to make him stay." I looked at him, really looked at him. The frayed jacket, the scuffed sneakers, the arrogant tilt of his chin. He wasn't a project. He wasn't a victim. He was just a selfish boy making a choice. "Okay," I said. Lucius paused, halfway zipped up his backpack. He looked at me, confused by the lack of resistance. He was used to me pushing back. He thrived on it. It made him feel valuable. "Okay," he repeated, frowning slightly. "Just okay. Have fun," I said, turning my body away from him to face my own desk. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. It was thick and heavy. Inside was the application for the Rhode Island School of Design. The application I had thrown away because the tuition was too high and Lucius needed me to stay local. "Wait, what is that?" Lucius asked, leaning over slightly to try and see what I was doing. His tone held a flicker of annoyance, displeased that my attention was no longer entirely consumed by him. "Nothing you need to worry about," I murmured. I clicked my mechanical pencil. The sharp snick of the lead advancing sounded incredibly loud in the emptying classroom. I began to fill out the top line. My name, Cynthia Anderson. "Whatever," Lucius scoffed, grabbing his bag. "I'll text you later, if I'm not busy." He walked away, his steps light, and hurried, rushing off to catch up to the girl who smelled like vanilla and ruin. I didn't watch him leave. For the first time in 10 years, I looked down at my own paper. The graphite scratched against the pristine white surface, making a soft, steady sound. It was the sound of a slate being wiped clean. Let him go to the cabin. Let him get arrested. Let him fail his senior year. Let him rot. I had a portfolio to finish. The art room on Monday morning smelled like kneaded erasers, wet clay, and the sharp chemical bite of fixative spray. It was a quiet sanctuary tucked away on the 3rd floor. I sat on a wobbly wooden stool, my hand stained black, with willow charcoal, pressing the brittle stick against a large sheet of rough-tooth paper. The friction sent a satisfying vibration up my wrist. In my past life, I hadn't touched charcoal since my sophomore year. Lucius hated the way the dust got on his clothes when I hugged him. Down in the main hallways, the school was buzzing like a disturbed hornet's nest. The gossip had reached a fever pitch before first period even started. The cabin party had been a disaster. Someone, probably a neighbor, annoyed by the bass vibrating their windows, had called the cops. Rumors flew thick and fast. Harper had managed to slip out a back window, ruining a pair of suede boots in the mud, but escaping cleanly. Lucius hadn't been so lucky. He had been caught holding a plastic cup of cheap keg beer, too drunk to form a coherent sentence, let alone run. In the timeline that was now dead, I had spent this exact Monday in the counseling office, crying, taking the blame for the alcohol, claiming I had snuck it into his car. Without his knowledge, I had earned myself a week of detention and a permanent mark on my spotless record, all to keep him eligible for the lacrosse team. Today, I just blended a shadow on my canvas with my thumb, relishing the powdery texture of the charcoal against my skin. Cynthia. The voice was raspy, scraped raw by shouting. And cheap cigarettes. I didn't jump. I slowly wiped my hands on a dirty rag before turning around. Lucius stood in the doorway. He looked atrocious. His skin had a sickly grayish pallor, and the bags under his eyes were deep, bruised purple. He smelled like sour sweat, unwashed hair, and the sickly sweet mints he always chewed to mask the stench of his bad decisions. His left cheek bore an angry red scrape, likely from being shoved against the side of a police cruiser. "Hey!" I said. My voice was a calm flat line in the quiet room. He stepped inside, kicking the door shut with his heel. The heavy wooden door slammed, with a loud hollow thud that echoed off the cinderblock walls. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, pacing the short distance between the drying racks. "And my easel. It's bad. Chloe," he muttered, not looking at me, speaking to the floor. My dad went ballistic. He threw a bottle at the wall when the cops brought me home. He locked me out. I slept in my car all weekend. A phantom ache twitched in my chest. It was a reflex. 10 years of conditioning screamed at me to stand up, wrap my arms around him, smooth his messy hair, and tell him I would fix it. I could feel the ghost of that heavy, suffocating responsibility settling on my shoulders. I fought the urge to reach for my wallet, to offer him my lunch money, to offer him my bed. I bit the inside of my cheek until the metallic taste of copper flooded my mouth. The pain grounded me. "That sounds awful," I said, leaning back on my stool. I crossed my arms. Lucius stopped pacing. He finally looked at me. His eyes, heavily bloodshot, narrowed in confusion. He waited a beat. He was waiting for the follow-up. He was waiting for the here. "Take my keys," or the "let me call Mr. Harrison, and ask for an extension on your project." When the silence stretched on, filled only by the hum of the ventilation system, his confusion morphed into frantic irritation. "That's it," he snapped, his voice cracking. "I'm telling you I'm sleeping in a freezing Honda Civic, and you just say that sounds awful? Cynthia, I have an AP Gov paper due tomorrow. I haven't even started. I need you to let me use your notes. And I need a place to crash." He stepped closer, invading my space. The smell of his desperation was suffocating. "No," I said. It was a tiny word. It slipped out of my mouth so effortlessly it almost surprised me. Lucius froze. He blinked rapidly, as if I had suddenly started speaking Russian. "What do you mean?" "No. I mean, no," I repeated, picking up a fresh stick of charcoal. "I'm not doing your government paper. And my mom is painting the guest room so you can't stay over. You should probably go to the library and start researching your topic." He stared at me, his jaw slack. The arrogance that usually defined his features had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, hollow-eyed boy. He looked at my hands, blackened, with soot, and then at the canvas. "What is wrong with you lately?" he demanded, his tone turning vicious, a desperate defense mechanism. "You're acting like a total you used to care about me." "I do care, Lucius." He lied smoothly, the words falling like dead leaves, "which is why I think you need to handle this yourself." Character building. I turned back to my drawing, pressing the charcoal into the paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. "You're unbelievable." He spat, his voice shaking, with a potent mix of rage and panic. He waited another 3 seconds, hoping I would break, hoping I would drop the charcoal, and beg for his forgiveness. I didn't move. He stormed out, ripping the door open, and letting it slam so hard the windows rattled. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the massive seismic shift of a tectonic plate inside my soul. I had just watched him step onto the ledge, and for the first time, I hadn't thrown myself underneath to cushion his fall. I looked at the canvas. The drawing was messy, chaotic, and dark. It was beautiful. By November, the rot had set in. It wasn't a spectacular explosion. It was a slow, agonizing leak, without me intercepting his missed assignments, forging his father's signature on warning letters, and physically dragging him out of bed on test days. Lucius's academic facade crumbled into chalk dust. The cold weather had stripped the trees bare, leaving the campus looking stark and unforgiving. I walked across the frozen quad, the icy wind biting at my cheeks, A heavy, thick envelope tucked safely in my bag. The Rhode Island School of Design. Early acceptance. I felt a quiet, simmering warmth in my stomach that the winter wind couldn't touch. My hands were shoved deep into the pockets of a new wool coat. A coat I bought, with the money I didn't spend on Lucius's college application fees. Up ahead, near the smoking boundary line, a small crowd had gathered. I slowed my pace, my boots crunching rhythmically against the frost-heaved pavement. Harper was standing there. She was wearing a pristine white puffer jacket, her blonde hair tucked beneath a cashmere beanie. She looked immaculate. Beside her stood the starting quarterback, a guy with broad shoulders and a terrifyingly blank stare. Lucius was standing across from them. He looked smaller than I remembered. His gray hoodie was stained, cuffs now completely unraveled. He was gesturing wildly, his voice carrying over the wind. "Come on, Harp. You said you'd talk to your dad about giving me a job at the dealership," Lucius pleaded, shifting his weight nervously. "I got kicked off the team. If I don't get some cash flow, my dad is going to kick me out for real." Harper laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, which somehow made it worse. It was a light, dismissive twinkling sound. "Lucius, my dad doesn't hire dropouts. And honestly, you're kind of a buzzkill lately. Stop texting me so much. It's weird." She turned her back on him, slipping her arm through the quarterback's. They walked away, leaving Lucius standing alone in the freezing cold. He watched her go, his shoulders slumped, the absolute picture of defeat. In my first life, Harper had ruined him, and I had spent a decade trying to put him back together, only for him to crawl back to her the second he had a six-figure salary. Now, without my foundation to stand on, he wasn't even worth her time to ruin. He was just pathetic. He turned, kicking a frozen clod of dirt with his sneaker, and saw me standing 10 feet away. He froze. The wind whipped between us, carrying the smell of exhaust from the idling buses and the bitter scent of dead leaves. He walked toward me. There was no arrogance left. His eyes were hollow, sunken pits. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. "Did you see that?" he asked. His voice raw, a bitter, ugly smile twisted his lips. "Everyone's bailing. The rats are leaving the sinking ship." He stopped in front of me, looking down at his scuffed shoes. "I failed. Gov. Cynthia. I'm not graduating in the spring. I have to go to summer school." He looked up at me, his eyes shining, with unshed, frustrated tears. It was the look he used to give me when he wanted me to bleed for him. "I don't get it," he whispered. "You used to be right there. Every time I slipped, you always caught me. What happened to you? Why did you stop?" The air between us was heavy, charged, with a decade of unlived history. I looked at his face, searching for the man who had coldly kicked me out of my own home in 10 years. I couldn't find him. That man would never exist, because I refused to build him. "I realized something," I said, my voice steady, unbothered by the cold. "What?" he croaked. "I realized that I was drowning, so you could float." I pulled my hands out of my pockets. My cuticles were perfect. My skin was unscarred, and I don't want to drown anymore. He stared at me, searching my face for a crack, for a hint of the desperate girl he used to own. "You did this," he suddenly hissed, a spark of the old, entitled fury flaring to life in his chest. He took a step closer, trying to loom over me. "You stopped helping me on purpose. You wanted me to fail." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just looked at him, with an absolute, chilling apathy. "I didn't make you fail, Lucius," I said softly, stepping around him. "I just put the letter back on your desk." I didn't wait to see if he understood. I didn't wait to watch the realization dawn in his eyes that I had known about Harper's invitation all along. I just kept walking. The frozen pavement crunched beneath my boots. The sky above was a pale, bruised gray, but the air in my lungs was sharp and clean. I walked past the crumbling edge of his ruined life toward the art studio, toward Rhode Island, toward a future that belonged entirely, selfishly, to me. If you've ever poured your soul into someone who only used it to water their own grass, you know exactly how Cynthia feels. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't fighting to save a toxic relationship. It's having the cold, hard courage to just let them walk away. What do you think Cynthia should do next to secure her own future? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you want part 3. And don't forget to subscribe for the rest of her revenge.